Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser Premier League Fantasy Show. I am Gally here in Massachusetts, coming to you with my host from Chicago. He's already in the red, but more importantly, hopefully he won't be whining about how hot it is. Is it still ungodly hot in Chicago?
Dude, you have no idea. It was, and when people say, "Oh, it's 100 degrees outside," it was actually literally 100 degrees outside. It was one of the most disgusting days. I was inside for most of it working, but I could just feel it outside. Even it was not great, but it's over now.
And there will be some time at some point where you will be complaining about the weather and it will be too cold, or there will be snow and there will be frustration. And I will remind you
Not for
of the
me.
hot days. No, not for you. Imperious to the weather, except for when it's a little bit warm. David Cosgrove checks in. Good evening, David. Hopefully you're having a good week. So let's get right to it. We'll start out quickly. A little announcement. Don't forget to join the Fantasy Premier League, our American Scouser Cup. League registration still open. You can jump in at any time just by entering the code on your screen in the Join a Public League. Speaking of that league, we have kind of a tight race up at the top. Top 10 overall, really close, all within 10 total points. Karma 11 coming in this week with one of the highs of the league with 68 points, got their total up to 148, brings them to the top 82,000 overall. Nothing too shabby after 2 weeks. I want to point out our good friend William Peppard, last year's
He's back.
I think runner-up, is back near the top, also keeping himself in a respectable top 320,000 in the world. But we would be remiss without mentioning the one guy with a red arrow on the screen, but happens to be one of our contributors, Trevor Utley, member of the Thursday podcast right before this show, holding his own at 6 overall, 141 points, 2 solid weeks in a row to start. So good stuff there. We'll get into it a little bit here. David Cosgrove wants to know if Ben Mee will be fit. I'm not really sure that that's going to move the pendulum or the needle, but I'm not really sure there. Trevor also is jumping in with a boo me. I don't know if we need to boo you, Trevor, but if you continue to beat me this badly, we will continue to boo you. So before we take a look at last week's team of the week, any one or two things that jumped out at you quickly as you think about last match week overall from a fantasy perspective, of course?
If my brain tells me to avoid Richarlison always, and I go against that, I should do a better job of listening to myself in the future when I say don't go for Richarlison, because it's really annoying. And also, the interesting one of the other interesting things I've been kind of keeping track of is the 6.5 midfielder situation, because you had at the very beginning of the year you had Mbuemo, you had Matoma, and you had Eze. If you picked one of those guys, or if you picked two of those guys, you'd be having pretty good weeks. If you picked the other one, Eze, you will not be having such good weeks. So it's been really interesting to see the differences between those three mids there.
Yeah, I think that's actually a solid shout right there. I think that the fact that you clearly are one of the folks who had Eze or picked Eze, it didn't work out. Kelly is one of those people as well. You know, I'm mad at myself. We're going to get to what we're doing this week. I'm very mad at myself because I had Mbuemo in my roster right up till the Friday, right before the deadline, and then made my last couple moves and took him out. And because of it, he hasn't been in my roster for the first 2 weeks. He's the highest points getter in the game. I think, honestly, at that point, I had Mbuemo and Wisa in my side, which probably would have me around that top 10 had I left those two players in for João Pedro and Garnacho. So it's a frustration nonetheless. But we always get to our questions, especially those that are actually being asked about fantasy. Cosgrove asks us, as you know, I'm a newbie to this with McAllister card being overturned. Do you get the points back for the sending off? You don't get the points back for the sending off. because they see that as like points in the game. Obviously, you do get your player available for the next 3 matches. And I will say, after seeing Endo and Mo miss a penalty, I actually think that at some point this year in that 5 to 5.5 price range, that McAllister becomes a really positive shout. And so maybe he's even 6, I don't know, but he's a little less than the other premium players. It gives an opportunity to get into that Liverpool attack, especially when you see what McAllister can do as he starts to become the most furthest forward player on that left or right hand side. So interesting shout there. Let's take it.
Possibly penalties, right?
Well, and the penalties is a big deal as the season progresses. I think
we're not sure who's going to take those duties. If Mo, this is all pertaining if Mo does lose the duties for the Pens, but it's been, it's one of those things where I mean, if Mo and Milner were both on the field, Milner would be taking the penalty, right? So it's not like Mo hasn't been not the guy to take the penalty before, but it's a matter of, do you give it to Mac? Do you give it to Sobo? Like there's a little bit at play there.
Yeah, and I think the other part is there's still opportunity where Mo's going to get subbed off and you get penalties in the last 10, 15 minutes of matches, and there's a good chance McAllister will still be on the pitch, because I believe McAllister will be a 90-minute player once he is fully fit and playing in his attacking midfield position. At his age and kind of his body type and strength, it would make the most sense. So let's take a quick look at last week's team of the week. Definitely a few surprises. First thing that jumps out at me, obviously, is the Brentford combination again. We got used to having multiple Brentfords last year in this screenshot when we'd review it. We did not get used to it being Wisa, obviously. But overall, great performance by both. Once again, Embuemo shows up. He's really everywhere right now. He's playing with a ton of confidence. I think he hit the post in that match as well, so could have had even more attacking returns. What kind of jumps out at you? That was the first one at me, was that, here we go again with Embuemo and Jonas Wisa.
Yeah. Definitely seeing Vicario up there is a little surprising, considering what kind of fixtures there were this past week. And then, of course, the year where everyone's off of Leon Bailey is the year where Leon Bailey just flies right back into the picture. I don't think it's quite enough for me to want to bring him back after all that we went through last year in that partnership together. But it is nice to see. And then, Brighton's just hitting on all cylinders right now. And if they're going to score 3 to 4 goals a game, Estupiñán, March, and Matoma are going to be part of 2 or 3 of those goals. So it's a lot of exciting football. I think you've probably mentioned it along with Bickler, and we've talked about it, that they play really exciting football. And there are going to be a lot of goals there. It's just a matter of who's going to score them, because it's pretty well distributed. It's not you're going to have March with one really big game, and you're going to have Matoma with one really big game, and you're going to have Gross with one really big game, and you're going to have Ferguson with one really big game, and Pedro with one really big game. So it's going to be kind of difficult to try and pick exactly which Brighton guy you want to jump on that week. But having at least 1 or 2 of them, you're in a pretty good spot to get some sort of return from.
Yeah, I feel like that's what makes Estupiñán at this point almost the Brighton asset to own. I still think Matoma offers the most upside, and you kind of saw it with the flashes of brilliance. I think he's the one player that doesn't need the day to be going all Brighton's way to still have just a moment of sheer magic and score a goal. So for me, it is Estupiñán and Matoma. That could be because those are the 2 players that are in my side. But then again, that could just be wishful thinking. I don't think I've ever owned Sully March, and every time I watch him play, I think to myself, how is this guy getting all these points? How is this guy score these goals? Why is this guy always popping up in the right spots? And then I realize he's pretty good, and that's probably why all of this is working so well when he has these good managers. The other one that kind of surprised me, you mentioned it, Vicario there, but also, Luca Dean, Aurier, even Antonio, the corpse of Antonio finding its way back to the team of the week. So all interesting things. Also lets you know that the really high level teams, Arsenal's, the Cities, Liverpool's, their assets just aren't clicking on all cylinders yet. They're just not scoring at the rate of that we've become accustomed to. So let's take a look at the transfers in this week. Not really a shock that almost 1 million people have brought in Brian Mbeumo. We'll see on the next screen when we look at some prices, what's happening with that. I am a little surprised, to be honest, with Estupiñán and Matoma as well as they're playing. Their fixtures are about to take a turn. What are your thoughts on so much investment in these top 5 players? I mean, every one of them with 500,000 or more transfers in. Is this a lot of wild cards? Do you think we're going to see a lot of wild cards?
I don't think so. I don't think we're there yet. I think everyone feels like they're missing the Estupiñán and Matoma boat before Brighton's fixtures get really difficult, and they missed the boat, I guess I should say. So they want to kind of get on, but it doesn't. I know that their fixtures are going to get tougher, but if you expect anyone from Brighton to be getting returns, it's going to be those two together. So from that sense, it makes sense, and they're also reasonably priced. So especially if you have people coming off the likes of Rashford, coming off the likes of Bruno, maybe even coming off the likes of Mo, like there's room to have some extra money here and there. So I think all in all, it's a matter of the trends and what they've seen the last 2 weeks, and that's why they're getting so much movement right now. I will say I am one of the Mbuemos because I dropped Richarlison right after the Tottenham game. I was like, fuck this guy, I'm done. So Mbuemo comes in, and I might be late to that train, but I'm part of it now. So here we go.
You've just made my whole week so much worse. But we obviously Chilwell, another 500,000. I kind of want to disagree with you a little bit. I think you're going to be shocked at the percentage of people that rip the emergency cord and actually hit the wild card this weekend. I usually, always seem to put myself in a spot where I end up wild carding too early because I get overly frustrated with my side not breaking camp the way I want it to. I made a promise to myself for the last 2 years that I would not wild card at least until the first international break. So if I did wild card, I'd have 2 weeks of time to kind of play with the team and figure out what I wanted to do. Last year, I think I made it all the way to Thanksgiving or pretty close, or October, even though we had the wild card coming at the end of the World Cup. Yeah. But there was different strategy last year, knowing what we were going to get. Paul Bickler jumps in with, is it a requirement to be out of the top 100 to host the show? It absolutely is. And get your zigs in now, because at least within 2 weeks, you will forget to set your lineup. You will get outscored by 40 points in one single match week, and you will be frustrated and irritated. Or you'll just be showing up once a week to talk smack about the host of the show. But when we talk about things, how else to talk about prices going up and values rising than a comment from Paul Bickler? We love you too, Bickler. So this was a nice comment here. A nice graphic you found and sent over. We're really looking here at the guys who have had price increases in the last match week. A big increase, obviously, for Mbeumo goes up 0.2. Did you purchase him before the price rise, no. After the price rise? So you got him at 6.7.
Yes, I did.
All right. And any other of these players on the screen surprise you, jump out at you, shock you at all?
The last two United defenders, considering that they just lost 2-0 and didn't really pose anything defensively, I understand that they had a little bit of attacking threat, especially the first week. But if you're watching this past game against Spurs, there is no part of the United defense that I would want, unless maybe they're playing a poorer side at home and you want a Wan-Bissaka going down the wing to maybe add a little bit of potential attacking return. But yeah, I don't know how so many people moved on them so quickly that it caused the price jump. The rest I understand. Those two are bizarre.
It just had to be, I think it had to be something with underlying numbers and bonus numbers and just kind of the metrics, because their form is so high. And I know that form and percentage of ownership is usually the two biggest factors in the calculation for when they make price increases. I will say, as someone who, has owned Foden or has, and has thought about buying Julian Alvarez, I think it's easy to see why Alvarez is quickly rising in price after his first 2 match weeks. Why Luis Diaz, both of them players that have scored in both weeks. I think there's only 3 players maybe in the Premier League that have scored in both game weeks. Luis Diaz and Julian Alvarez each being one of them, and along with Mbeumo. And I think Wisa. I think those are the players that have gotten goals in both match weeks. I could be wrong there. And I also think, Trevor makes a good point. United are playing Forest at home, and they do have a better run of fixtures coming up from a defensive standpoint. They are at the top of the ticker over the next 6 to 8 game weeks. But to be honest, they just look so poor in the midfield. And then Mount's injured. They can't get the balance right between where Fernandez should play. I don't think they're getting it right now with the wingers. You have Sancho just languishing. Garnacho looks like he's kind of isolated when he's out there. Rashford looks poor through the middle. And Martial still looks like Martial, which is disinterested and bored and semi-irritated that he's forced to play professional football for a living. But and then all of that is then Anthony's just doing circles and running by himself, like just kicking things. It's a crazy, crazy time at United. It makes Liverpool fans and supporters happy and warm inside. So I'd say that it's pretty self-explanatory on the outs. John Stones and Reece James, both with some mass exoduses for guys who hung on to them after match week 1. Unfortunate for Stones, thought he was going to have a really, really big year, maybe be the pick of the City defense. Now sounds like he's going to be sidelined for a bit with an injury, might even keep him out of the Euro qualifiers, which is, that's a big blow to City, who, as we've talked about on the podcast and on the Premier League show this week, isn't as deep a side as they are a stacked and loaded with talent side, right? Like they have a lot of youth players coming through. So big loss for them. And then, of course, as I like to refer to him, Reece, fantasy killing, manager firing, James. Arguably the biggest tease in the history of FPL is Reece James. Put him on your team, watch a red arrow or a red exclamation or a red, triangle with exclamation point, because this guy is flagged literally more than, me on a Sunday afternoon trying to score goals and poach all afternoon for being offsides. Literally, this guy is ridiculous with how often he's flagged for injury. Of the actual players playing, Gabriel, Rashford, and João Pedro, surprised by the movement off of these players? Do you think it's knee jerk with either Rashford or João Pedro?
Definitely more so with Rashford and João Pedro. Gabriel, something had to have happened between him and Arteta, because this is just, I know we talked about it after week 1, but this is just getting beyond weird at this point. And for them to not play their best center back from last year, there's got to be something else going on. And Arteta is saying that it wasn't right for the system and this and that.
He's saying because of the inverted fullback, it doesn't fit him playing on the left if there's 3, so he doesn't like him moving into the middle, which it kind of makes sense. I still think there's a chance that Gabriel eventually ends up being the center back when Zinchenko is healthy, because then they invert on his side and it changes everything, and Saliba's the one in the middle.
Sure.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I don't blame everyone for selling, because it's one thing to have a $5 million defender that doesn't play. It's another thing to have one that you bought expecting clean sheets and goal opportunities out of, and then gets cameo appearances for 1 point, blocking other clean sheets and moves that you made. Or, maybe I'm the one who's bitter because Gvardiol sat on the bench, so Gabriel could come in for a 1-pointer for me for the second week in a row. Because I thought, just like you, there's no way Arteta won't start him 2 weeks in a row, especially after you get an injury to Timber, and then he trots Ben White out there at center back, and Tomiyasu, and I'm just holding my head like, what the hell's going on? It'll be interesting this week with no Tomiyasu, no Urian Timber, and arguably Zinchenko still not ready to start and play 90 minutes. Will Gabriel get a start? I know this. He will not get a start on my team. I think the João Pedro thing is a bit harsh. Just didn't start the second match week, which kind of makes sense. I bet those people that sold early in the match week are frustrated now, finding out that Cisco is going to be out for a while, and that adds a ton more minutes into João Pedro. He is their record signing. He did score a goal, whether we like it or not, and he's on penalties. Like, to me, at $5.5 million, it's worth a punt, even if he's the first guy on your bench. I'm not surprised by Rashford. I do not like the way United looks going forward. They better hope this Højlund kid is ready to play day one, because Rashford needs to go back out on the left, or they're in some real trouble there. So let's flip over now. It's a little small, bit shocking. This one actually took 2 pages to go through the decreases, and we're going to spend the time on the kind of the more important ones, the ones with more ownership. So we'll start with the Arsenal players. We've talked about Gabriel and his poor play, and less than poor play, his poor minutes. And his 25% ownership has led to him seeing a 0.1 price drop. I would honestly not be surprised if that drops another 0.1 before a ball is kicked on Saturday or Sunday. And surely by next week. So if you're still hanging on to Gabriel and he doesn't play this week, I think you have to think about making a move, and you might have to make that move earlier than later. And then, Eze took a drop. We saw a drop here for some fringe players like, Raul Jimenez and Olise, Elliott and Jones of Liverpool. Anything else here jump out at you or surprise you? Anything here make you think, maybe I picked that player up?
No, I'm just sitting here and thinking about how I have both Gabriel and Eze and how my life is going really well right now.
Hey, sometimes a price drop, though, isn't the worst thing. Sometimes you see one of these and you realize, that you wanted a Lewis Potter from Brentford as like a budget midfielder or something. You want to save some extra money somewhere. You're going to make a move, right? To maybe switch one of your semi 6 to 7 midfielders. Maybe you want to get Eze to Foden and you need cash to do it, and you take down another player. So I think sometimes the price drops help because they give you an idea of a move you might make next week, and that small savings that it could make or more value brought in. When we look at the second page here, the one that obviously jumps out, John Stones, we talked about the high exodus. And then you see a guy like, Callum Wilson at Newcastle, already starting the price decline. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if by the time he actually starts playing in October, November, and starts, doing his Callum Wilson thing where he scores 8 and 5, he's at like 7-4, 7-3. Because I do think that he'll continue to have some ownership and he'll continue to see transfers out, because I just think Isak at this point has separated himself as a player and is just too good all around with what he does for Newcastle Football Club to actually sit. Yeah. What do you think about Wilson and Stones, from a drop standpoint?
Well, Isak, it's just a matter of how long he can stay healthy, because as long as he's healthy, he's got that spot. With Newcastle being in Europe this year, we're going to see how they're going to rotate, and maybe Callum Wilson's more of the group stage Champions League guy. Maybe Isak just plays all of it. Who knows? But come October, like you're saying, October, November, when these games start coming a bit quicker, we'll really get a sense of what Eddie Howe is like and who he wants for these situations. John Stones, I think eventually his ownership is going to hover around the same percentage because people are going to come back on him as soon as he's back. I don't know that the City defense is difficult because there's so many center backs you can choose from. It's just a matter of who's in the best form right now. And if you want a City defender, you just pay attention to that. And they pretty much are all priced around the same. So it's not like you're losing or gaining that much.
Yeah, so there's a lot of going on this slide, but I think it's a really good one. It lists out players by position, obviously, and it's basically listing their overall value and cost overall in the game. And then What I'm assuming here is their expected points
this week. Yep.
for this week. So as right before we look at our teams and talk about the moves that we're thinking about doing this week, obviously, it's leaning heavy on City assets, which makes sense. They're playing a week inside in Sheffield United. They should be ready to get out there. It's kind of like the best time ever to be loading up on City assets because the guy really can't feasibly rotate. Like, they don't really have a side that allows them to rotate too much at this point. Like, so the Pep roulette, whether Pep's there or not to spin the wheel, I'm sure will still be a little bit in full effect. But I think you can see here, expected points are high for Ederson. Robert Sanchez, Chelsea, not a huge fan of the keeper himself, but it'll be interesting to see how Chelsea plays and what they do. Really interesting here, the Ben Chilwell, Purvis Estupiñán, because those are two guys that are both very highly owned and in many, many sides. Not surprised to see Ben White kind of skyrocketing up this list now that he's starting to start. We haven't talked about Malo Gusto, the youngster at Chelsea, who's now a $4 million starter playing in a wingback system, whose stats, by the way, were actually more forward than Reece James was the week prior against Liverpool. So could be a steal down the road and a real enabler. What about why don't you touch on the midfielders? Give us your ideas of what you're seeing here from the midfield, and then we can talk about the forwards before we take a look at our teams.
Yeah, obviously, with the midfielders, you have that Arsenal trio sitting right there with Martinelli, Saka, and Odegaard. With Fulham at home, it might be a pretty open game, but I could also honestly see it going 0-0, 1-0. I feel like Fulham, while they have some lapse in their concentration, they play up to opponents, and I think that especially London derby, kind of one of those early season games, make a statement kind of things. Mitrovic is leaving, so kind of play for each other as a team and not really have to worry about any other distractions. I think it might be a pretty low scoring game, but obviously this chart thinks that it might be pretty open. So having one of the three Arsenal assets might be a good idea to have. And then with Rashford and Bruno, United's at home against Forest, so that again a lot of potential for some returns there. With forwards, Haaland and Alvarez, especially with De Bruyne being out, we're going to see a lot of Haaland and Alvarez together. And we can, with this past week, we can see that both of them have incredible potential to just knock in a goal from wherever they are at whatever point in the time. So I see a lot of teams, I think Kelly included, that are doing the Haaland and Alvarez duo because that you're going to get some sort of return between those two. It doesn't matter, and most likely they're going to be part of it with each other too, whether it's an assist from one to the other or vice versa. And then, of course, Eddie Nketiah, they're part of that Arsenal forward line that are expected to have a lot of points. So, yeah, I think a sleeper to maybe look at would be one, maybe Solanke with where, let's see, because Bournemouth has Spurs at home. I know Spurs just held United to a clean sheet, but at home, I feel like Bournemouth is a different animal. And if anyone's going to score, I think Solanke is going to be the one to do it. And I don't know how much longer Ange can go without Spurs conceding with the way they play. So I think it'll overall be pretty interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, I can understand that shout. I kind of like the opposite one. I'd almost say that I think that Son might be a good shout even at 9 million going against Bournemouth. I think Son has looked better and he's starting to find himself kind of in that system. And I think this might be the week where they give Lo Celso a run out and try to play more with an attacking number 10 and playing Son as more of the false 9 and maybe starting basically because they don't know if Maddison's going to be able to play this week. So I could see them basically dropping Richarlison and jump starting the offense a little bit, hopefully. So that'll be interesting. And, at some point, too, they're going to institute Emmanuel Solomon into the starting 11. And I really think that's going to help them because they're going to have another dynamic winger. I mean, at times last year, he was really, really bright on loan at Fulham. I think that was kind of a quiet, sneaky good signing by Spurs. So it'll be interesting to see what Spurs do. I do think there are some real gems here. And I really like this graphic. And I do think it's important. I think this is why you're seeing and you're hearing about the people transferring off of Mo and making changes, is when you start to look at the average points and then you think about basically the points per million is really the statistic that is the one that separates the good from the great fantasy Premier League managers. And at 12.5 million, when you're not captaining the player, it is really hard to quantify points per million at that spending with the overall scoring. So let's take a look at your team. We'll start with reviewing last week. Tough week, obviously. Yeah. Anything you want to add other than tough week, obviously?
There was just sadness all around. I chose almost the right captain. I don't think there was going to be a world where I was going to pick Estupiñán as my captain. But going Mo obviously was a better decision than Haaland for what it's worth. So other than that, and then now I just have the Gabriel mess to think about. Yeah, so I think there's nothing else I need to say. It was just disappointing.
And your transfer for this week was ripping the Band-Aid off and getting rid of the crazy eyes and bringing in Brian Mbeumo from Brentford.
Correct.
And you did that with one free transfer, correct?
Correct. Yes. So if I do another one, I will be taking a hit. And I have been thinking about it, but I really told myself I don't want to take a hit too early. And game week 3 is pretty goddamn early, so I think I'm going to hold off still.
I don't really see where you could take a hit with this team where you could guarantee yourself a 4-point swing off moving off a player. And, in this instance, you have 2 playable defenders, especially with the Doge, who could come in and start easily for Gabriel, along with Chilwell and Estupiñán, and you can start all 5 of your midfielders
and that's
with Mbeumo. So for me personally, honestly, I think it would be silly to take a hit. You start your team that's on the field right now, except for Udogie for Gabriel.
Yep.
You keep those 4 points in the hopper. I mean, I'd probably throw Pickford in for Turner. And then honestly, if João Pedro for some reason doesn't play, or if these unfortunate rumors that Crystal Palace is considering Manchester City's approach for Eze because it's in the 75 to 100 million range, and he gets benched, well, now at least you have Botman coming in as your first sub and Gabriel is your second. And you still have Osla, even though it's against City, you probably don't really want to be utilizing him, so he sits there on your third on your bench.
Yep.
Any other long-term plans or ideas you have for the side, or at this point it's just stopping yourself from, making a drunken transfer or even just a late night blurry-eyed transfer that leads to you waking up with a -4?
Just stopping the bleeding a little bit for now. I think long-term I'm going to look to move off of Mo and kind of see where I could, because there's a lot of good options to downgrade. If Luis Diaz continues this nice streak, downgrading from Mo to Luis and saving nearly 4.5 million and using that elsewhere could be really helpful. So I think that's where I'm headed to, because I like everyone else right now for the most part. Besides Mo and besides maybe Bruno, depending if United sorts themselves out, I'll be fine. But if United doesn't sort themselves out over these next 3-4 weeks that have easier fixtures, it's going to be really tough to believe in Bruno after this.
Yeah, I got you there, and I'm struggling with it right now. So this is my side. Another disappointing week for me. Whether it be, Forrest conceding the goal and Turner losing the clean sheet, to Gabriel coming in and getting a 1-point cameo appearance, blocking a clean sheet by Gvardiol that I had on my bench. A lot of frustration all around. Garnacho once again was really bright and probably one of United's only offensive attacking weapons going forward. Really did get robbed too, because should have gotten assist at a minimum on the handball that he kicked off Romero's arm about 1.5 feet from his body that they didn't call, which also would have been Bruno Fernandes stepping up and taking the penalty. No, I'm not still bitter. But that obviously would have helped and been a nice 8-point swing and possible bonus points. Really, the only difference between me and you last week was that Odegaard stepped up to take that penalty, which was a shock and a little bit of a surprise. Arteta, after the match, said he had no idea, and that as far as he knows, Saka's still on penalties at the club. But Odegaard was holding the ball, and Saka said, take it, and the kid buried it. If I'm Odegaard and I'm wearing the armband, I'm picking the ball up next time, too, because it was a perfect penalty.
Yeah.
And Saka has missed, I think it's 3 of his last 4, including 1 this preseason. So it's not like he's infallible from the spot. It's funny you made the comment. I am one of the people moving off of Mo, and I did it this week. Oh. So I don't love it. I won't lie. I wasn't planning it, but I told you last week that I was not going to make a transfer, and I felt confident about that. I still feel fine that I didn't make a transfer, because if my team had performed to the level of its capabilities and its expected points, I would have been in a good position. But I had 2 free transfers, and I knew I had to use at least 1. And honestly, with the way this team's constructed, having Mo and Holland really handicaps me to really change my team out of like-for-like moves. And I really couldn't find ways to make my team that much better. I mean, I could downgrade Gabriel to Henry and maybe bring Garnacho up to a little bit of a higher, more nailed-on player. I could take Gabriel up a little bit and drop another player down, like a Bruno or a Saka or an Odegaard. But I kind of love all the fixtures coming up for United and Arsenal, and I don't really want to move off the Arsenal attackers. So after a lot of thinking and looking at the numbers and thinking about, the injuries and the squads and the matches, it made the most sense for me at this point was to go from Salah to Foden and take that 5 million. It allowed me to go from Garnacho to Mbeumo, and I turned Salah and Garnacho into Mbeumo and Foden. And with the fixtures coming up, I feel good about it, which means one of them gets subbed off 12 and a half minutes in on Saturday. But I do have a plan here. I think I have 2.5-3 million still left in the bank.
Yeah.
And my plan is to possibly roll it one more week and have 2 transfers, or next week move off of Gabriel. I could go as high as to go to Trent if I wanted to put all my eggs back into higher end assets right before the turn of fixtures for Liverpool. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to actually decrease Gabriel. And then at that point, I'll have about 4 million to play with. And I'm going to make a real strong decision about either upgrading one of the 2 strikers to a more formidable playing strike force, and then maybe downgrading one of the 8.5 mids. I kind of want to be able to keep moving as the fixtures move. And some of the best managers in the world, the highest rated managers that stayed in the top 10,000 all year last year, they consistently had between 2 and 5 million available on match days in the bank. Yeah. And it allows them to actually make moves as if they're wildcarding at all times. And you know what those people don't have to do? They don't have to make -4 and -8 hits so they can bring Mo in when that 3 great run of fixtures that you're willing to have a non-playing bench. And then you can rip the wild card at the end of that. And I think it's that kind of like multi-week transfer planning that I'm hoping will allow me, to move from this 2.7, 2.8 million in the world position that I have. But at one point last year, I was somewhere around like 5 or 6 million after like match week, like 8 or 10, somewhere around there. And I got myself all the way up to the top 100,000 at one point before having a few bad weeks and finishing in the top, 250,000 in the world. I still believe that consistent play and avoiding hits and picking the right captains each week is really what you need to do. it would have gutted me if I was someone like Bickler, who's had 2 really good weeks and made a big call decision to make Saka his captain and then have Saka not step up and take the penalty. I mean, like, I saw that happen and was like, wow, all those Saka owners, all those Saka captains, they're going to really, make a move on the Hollands.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see what happens, as time goes on with Holland, because you made a comment earlier about Julian Alvarez, and I give my wife Kelly a lot of credit. She's actually had Alvarez in since the first match week, so she didn't even jump on him. She had the double both weeks, and I really think there is a much greater chance for Holland blanks this season than we saw last season. Last season, I feel like they felt like they had to feed him and force it at all times. And part of that was like De Bruyne not having a great year. Bernardo Silva not really chipping in offensively. Foden not offering that much. Grealish not coming along till the second half. And Holland just did everything. And I think with Alvarez kind of establishing himself, you saw it at times in the last match where they were actually looking for Alvarez first on runs and dropping into the midfield and coming deep. And the thing about Alvarez is that guy is not a number 2 striker. In his mind, when he gets the ball, he thinks about putting it in the net. So it'll be really interesting to see if that negatively impacts not Holland, the Premier League asset, but if Erling Haaland, again, to the argument before about Mo, if Erling Haaland isn't a guarantee captain, week in, week out, top scorer, he can't warrant 14 million, especially when he gets less points. I mean, you could take that 14 million and really spread it around. Be interesting to see if there becomes a time where the template or the alternate template, the one that really allows you to make a move, doesn't exist in a world that doesn't have Erling Haaland or Mo Salah in it, which is kind of crazy to think. But so far this season,
haven't needed them.
You haven't needed them. Yeah. So any parting shots or last words, other than to remind everyone, we don't do this enough. There is a match tomorrow, Chelsea versus Luton at Stamford Bridge, which means we can all get to find out, is Luton as spunky, and do they have the fight that they showed in the first match week, or are they really the, sisters of the poor? And I apologize to the sisters and the poor, who have just come up to just kind of bide their 38 matches and find their way back down to the championship, a level where many believe they belong? Or is Chelsea as shit as they were against West Ham last week? And I hope it is the latter, my friend.
I want to see a Chelsea loss at Stamford Bridge, and I want to see heads fucking roll at that club. I think it would be so hilarious and entertaining to watch that unfold. I don't think it will happen at all, but can you imagine how fantastic and entertaining it'll be if Luton does somehow pull up even a draw at Stamford Bridge, and everyone is like that meme where the guy is sitting in the burning building. He's like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. That's going to be Chelsea in a nutshell. So I don't have any other parting words as far as fantasy goes, other than, if you want to make a move, just do it. Don't sit around and wait. That's kind of what I've been preaching this year and what I've been doing. And so far, it's been average results, but we're going to get there. It's going to be fun.
Hey, average isn't the worst in this game. It usually sees you improve. So you have to just shoot to be average, my friend. And it's not that far from the norm. So you just do your thing. You can get there one week at a time, small moves. My parting shot for this week is it'll be interesting to see if there's what kind of effect Pep Guardiola not being around the club actually has on City. And I know people say, oh, he's still there, he's going to be managing. That guy is a maniacal coach, and he's the one yelling at players, running out onto the pitch, grabbing them and putting them tactically in the right positions, right angles. He's a hands-on coach by all accounts, and he loves the training ground more than he loves match day, and that's why he acts like such a fool on match day. I really believe that. I do think it will have an impact, especially when it comes to their rotation and the substitution pattern. So I'm going to have an eye on that this weekend, one eye on that, so I can try to kind of formulate my plans around maybe shifting some of my city assets. And other than that, obviously, this is the American Scouser channel, so we'll have one eye on that Liverpool-Newcastle match. Feels like it's the match of the weekend. Happy that it's a Sunday, so my co-partner here and co-host can watch it fully and not be sitting at work watching it on his phone. I mean, he would never watch a match on his phone at work.
Never. I'm a good egg.
We will let you guys out of here on that. Thank you for watching. As always, please go to the YouTube page, subscribe to the channel. As Paul Bickler would say, smash that like button, share, comment, bring other listeners. If you want to have your team reviewed, feel free to send it in through Messenger on any of our social media platforms. And as always, thank you to all of our viewers, especially those who took the time to comment in the chat. And we will get you out of here on that. For that, this is another edition of the American Scouser TV Premier League show. We'll be back next Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, everyone, and have a great week.